Hello and welcome to today's video, where we will talk about strategy in the civil sector and engines, how Safran became the champion we know today, and for that, we are lucky to have Nicolas Decaux with us today.
Hello.
You're interested in civil aviation now too?
Well, absolutely yes, because once again, I'm one of the co-managers of the Cardon Valeur Equity Fund, which you can find in all your best life insurance contracts, and we're shareholders in Airbus, Safran, Thales, and Dassault Aviation. And so Safran is an engine manufacturer. They make the engines for the A320, well, the LEAP, an engine for the A320 and the Boeing 737. So yes, I'm also interested in civil engines and the economics of civil engines. It's absolutely central.
And let's not forget that the price of an engine is almost a third of the price of an aircraft. It's 25.
It's roughly 25% of the price of the aircraft. And in operating costs, if you include fuel, well, fuel plus engine maintenance, it's almost 50%, yeah. So it's absolutely key. It's actually the key component of an aircraft.
It's absolutely central, that's it.
So if we look a bit at the history, engines date back to the beginning of the 20th century. They were invented by Americans. The Wright brothers in 1903, they made the first piston engine, so a radial piston engine. Then in France, quite quickly, we had industrialists who got involved. Gnome, founded in 1905, then Rhone in 1913, they merged. The founders were the Seguin brothers and Louis Verdies, and they became a major engine manufacturer during World War I. They made 100,000 engines during World War I, 25 on their own. For aviation, yeah.
100,000. There were 100,000 planes in World War I.
World War I, no, we've forgotten, but it's crazy. And 75,000 built under license. So there you go. So they come out of World War I as the European leader in engines, and going into the interwar period, they were the European leader in engines. And you have to see that in the interwar period, aviation was like artificial intelligence is today. It was the cutting-edge technology. You see Saint-Exupéry, Aerospace was the super trendy thing of the time. Then came the Second World War, so they had to actually produce BMW engines under license during the occupation. But as a result, they fell far behind technologically, because the most modern things that the Nazis were doing at the time were being done in Munich, well, in Germany. And the collaborationist French factories were only making pre-war engines, actually. So basically, all the development during the war, they lost it at the end of World War II.
By the end, just before World War II, we had the first jet engines, but our inability to industrialize caused us to fall behind in producing new innovations.
Exactly. So the Germans were the first to make planes, jet engines, and actually, the English and the Americans were just behind. The English were 6 months behind, the Americans were 12 months behind. At the end of the war, everyone, the Soviets, the Americans, the English, tried to recruit German technicians who had worked on jet engines. They recruited several to move faster. But honestly, the Americans and English were already doing fine on their own. Well, we're going to break down some myths here. The Soviets, much less so actually. In fact, they mainly tried to recruit the German scientists so they wouldn't end up on the Soviet side. And as for us, we managed to get a few of them, especially the teams from BMW. And in particular, because Marcel Dassault, who was returning from deportation, helped Hermann Osterich from BMW move from the American zone to the French zone. And they actually recruited the technicians who had worked on the BMW 3, which powered the Heinkel 132 and the Rado 232. So not the Messerschmitt 232, which is the one everyone knows. That's a different engine, but other jet engines.
And Marcel Dassault just pointed out, as a little anecdote, that the first thing Dassault made was propellers for World War I. They started without engines and slowly advanced. I'm leaving the station.
I'm making a separate video because it's so long, there's so much to say. So Snecma, well, Snecma was created in 1945 actually. Gnome at Rhone was nationalized and turned into Snecma. The factories are mainly in the belt around Paris. Gennevilliers, Boulogne-sur-Aisne, and so on. Even Melun wasn't included yet, but it was nearby. At that time, it was really the working-class belt around Paris. And there, they do it. So it takes a little time. They need to catch up, and they launch the Atar military engine, which powers the attack aircraft, the Mystère, then the Mirage 3, the Mirage 4. Then in 1973, that's when they moved to the civilian sector. There is an agreement between Pompidou and Nixon for the launch of the joint venture, CFM, 50-50 with the Americans, with the goal of making a civilian engine, the CFM-56 to first re-engine military aircraft, especially the KC-135. Then actually it will power the Boeing 737 and the A320, and it's the first turbofan engine.
We had a partnership, but I'm unsure about the turbofan part. The French managed the central section, or maybe the Americans just agreed to join us on principle.
Well, I don't really know exactly why they agreed, but it's true that GE did, and still does today, the most complicated parts, what we call the hot sections. Because actually in the engine, the temperature rises very high to levels that actually melt metal. And so actually you need super special alloys, very advanced cooling techniques, so that the engine doesn't actually melt, and that's the part that GE does. And Safran, well, Snecma, then Safran. Snecma is now called Safran Aircraft Engines. They make what's called the cold parts, the turbine. So it's less complicated, it's still very technical, but the most difficult part is still done by GE.
I'll just explain that an engine has a sort of hot core, a bit like on fighter jet engines, and that drives a kind of big fan around it. And that's ultimately what gives it efficiency. It's the ratio between the hot in the middle and the cold on the outside that makes engines more and more efficient. And that's why the small engines on fighter jets are much less efficient than the very large engines on airliners, and as time goes by, engines get bigger and bigger, especially because we want a bigger fan around them.
There's a turbine, which is the jet part, and a fan in front. The fan is what really pushes the plane, but it only works at subsonic speeds, making it ideal for civilian aircraft. For a supersonic fighter jet, you can't have a fan up front. It's just the hot part, so to speak. So what matters is what's called the bypass ratio in English, which means how much air goes through the fan and around the turbine versus how much air goes through the turbine. And the higher this bypass ratio is, so for the LIP, the current engine, the successor to the CFM, we're above 10, 10.1. And for the new generations that we'll talk about later, we're trying to go up to 15 if there's a casing around it. A nacelle in French. And Safran right now, they're, well, CFM, so Safran plus GE, they're talking to us about an open fan, which is actually something that looks a lot like the engine of the 400M, the 400N civil version, meaning a turbine and then a propeller. In this case, it's not in a nacelle. And there we could have a bypass ratio of 70 and productivity gains of around 20%.
For example, compared to the latest generations we have today,
that's the goal.
Come on, let's get back to our topic.
CFM, so CFM, they launched the CFM56, which entered production in the 1980s, which powers, once again, the B737 and the A320. And over the life of the program, they produced, the last ones. In fact, the LEAP started being produced in 2016, 2017, so on the A320neo and also on the 737 MAX. They're now only producing a few as replacements, mainly replacement engines, what they call spares. They produce about 40 CFM56s per year today, but the real drop in CFM56 production was between 2015 and 2019. Replaced by the LEAP. And actually, starting with the CFM56, they produced 33,000 of them, and in 2019, the CFM56 had flown 1 billion hours for 600 operators. So actually, it's the biggest historical success in civil aviation, and with huge economies of scale. And actually, since they are the sole source, meaning the only supplier for the 737, which is the MAX, well, they were also the sole supplier for the CFM56 on the B737. Then the LEAP-1B sole supplier on the 737 MAX. So there they already have 100% of the market share on the 737. And on the A320, then A320, A320neo, there they have roughly 50% market share. The competitor is the Pratt engine, which was in the previous version, the V2500, and today it's the GTF geared turbofan. Geared means it's a gearbox, and the idea is to decouple the fan from the turbine because the fan is more efficient if it's large and spins slower, while the turbine needs to spin as fast as possible. So that was actually the gamble that Pratt took for the GTF. And it was a good technical idea, but industrially you could say that LIP still won in the end, because there have been quite a few technical problems with the GTF over the past 10 years, which are actually, there were major concerns about 10 years ago regarding the gearbox itself, because there's a decoupler in it, and it can get damaged very quickly. And actually, that's not really where the GTF had problems, it's more with the blades, which seemed simpler in the end. So, what seemed simpler? And really, CFM, they are extremely efficient in industrialization. They have engines that are that work very well. And now, today, there are A320SS with GTF engines that are grounded, about 30%, while there are almost no planes grounded because of engine issues on the CFM side.
And so, in the defense sector, we obviously know that they make the M88, they have made all the military engines for all the attack aircraft, and also some attempts in private jets.
Yeah, so we're not going to talk about it, but it went very badly. They were supposed to make the engine for a Dassault jet, and the program was mishandled, and so it was abandoned. But now it's Rolls engines. But yeah, so they make the M88, so now they're going to make the M88T Rex. So that's actually the historical activity, which goes back to the end of World War II. They make the engines for French fighter jets, and I think that's how it is. That's how it is.
So they were champions with LEAP and civilian aircraft engines, but not on the big ones.
Long haul, yes?
For long haul, that's it. Do we have a way to become equivalent to the Americans also on long haul aircraft? So, about long haul.
So today there are 4 major long haul programs. There's the 787, which is about 15 years old. There's the 777, which will become the 777X. Actually, GE has the largest market share there, and it's Rolls. Actually, it's dual-sourced, but with a very strong dominance by General Electric. And in this case, it's not part of CFM. GE does this all by itself, so Safran doesn't have any content in there. And then on the Airbus platforms, that is the 350 and the 330 Neo, well, the 330 and then the 330 Neo. So Trent XWB on the 350, and if I remember correctly, Trent 700 and Trent 7000 on the 330. There, Rolls has a monopoly. So it's really GE's and Rolls territory, the long-haul aircraft. And actually, it has profitability that is still lower than that of short-haul aircraft. The volumes are much lower, and Rolls would like, precisely as we've realized. So, Rolls was doing very badly until recently. For the past 2 or 3 years, things have been much better economically. And so now they're starting to get hungry for more, and they want to be part of the next generation of short-haul aircraft. Because if we look at what's going to happen now, the latest generation of engines for short-haul aircraft, I mean, it's to power them. The A320, the A321, Neo the B737, MAX announced in 2010-2011, first planes in 2016-2017. With this kind of program, it'll be about 20 years before a successor. And now the manufacturers are starting to talk to us about the next program, 2035, and it's starting to get closer. So we could have announcements at the end of the decade, so it could be in 3 years, actually. It could be in 2029, 2030. So now CFM will almost certainly offer a successor to the LIP. And what they're telling us about, so it's public, you know, it's not just for me. They're telling us about what they call an open fan. So the idea would be to make an engine that once again looks like the one on the A400M, meaning a turbine and a nacelle, and then the propeller around it. And here they want to make a big propeller. Today, the diameter, you know, of the LIP is about 2 meters. Here we could be talking about a diameter of around 4 meters. There you go, but so.
This means aircraft designs have changed because the engine no longer fits.
You must redesign the plane entirely since you can't simply attach it to an A320's wing. And Rolls says, well, I'd also like to get into the short-haul market. And they have a demonstrator, which is the Ultrafan 30. So actually, in this case, they would come with a gearbox, and they say they can achieve a 25% gain with theirs, so they would make a bigger engine, and with one, but in a nacelle, and they think they would save 25% in fuel, whereas the open fan, it's more like 20%. That's it. The open fan currently lacks a gearbox, but we could consider adding one. But I think CFM, they are quite hesitant to go with the gearbox because I think they believe it's quite risky from an industrial standpoint.
Is CFM meant to continue being an equal partnership between Safran and GE? Is one of them going to break away? Has one of them taken a technological lead that could allow them to get rid of the other partner? Or really, I
think that the purpose hasn't changed. Okay, I think everyone is comfortable with that. It doesn't really make you want to go into long-haul aircraft because actually the volumes are much lower, and so it's less profitable. I haven't read the original agreement, but maybe I still have the impression that it's in the original agreement that, in fact, Safran doesn't get involved in long-haul aircraft. For me, I think the most likely thing is that it won't change much.
Pratt.
So they made the V2500 today, they make the GTF. So they have 25% market share on short-haul flights. Not quite 25, since they have a little less than 50 on the A3, 20 A3, 20 A3, 21 Neo. Well, I think they will. A bit like CFM, they will offer something else. Now, I haven't seen a demonstrator. No, I think the most logical thing for them would be to, since their GTF is still a working plane engine, they just need to improve industrialization. So they could do a bit like what CFM did, meaning going from the CFM 56 to the LEAP. They changed the materials, they modernized the materials, but without making big architectural changes, which means the goal was to have flawless industrial execution. And I think that if Pratt comes and says to Airbus and Boeing, I'm going to make you a GTF that's a bit better, a bit lighter, with slightly better performance, but above all, flawless industrial execution, that could be an interesting proposition.
And I'm told that they're exhausting their engineers a lot on the military side with the F-35, which means they don't even have the bandwidth to try to come back to the civil sector and ramp up in the civil sector.
And then they also have to solve all the problems. There's really what we call firefighting. They really have to put out fires everywhere for the past 3 years, actually even longer than that. In 2023, they had to remove 1,200 engines from service to replace a lot of parts that were wearing out more quickly. These engines date back to the program's start in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And for that, well, you need to put engineers on it. They're in an SRA mode, which is necessary at Pratt today. And in any case, I haven't seen any communication about the next program.
Newcomers, Chinese, Russians, so...
Russian, I think you can forget about them. The Chinese have been working on their jet engines since at least 2018. They're working to certify it for COMAC, which now has several dozen aircraft in service, all using CFM LEAP 1C engines. So there still isn't a Chinese engine, even after 10 years in the program. Yeah. On the A300 generation, well, on the Neo and Max generation, we're halfway there. And for now, there still isn't a Chinese engine, but there is an ambition to have both short-haul and long-haul engines. We'll see in 3 to 5 years, but they're trying.
Knowing that, the feedback I've received about China is that it's not a matter of choice. It's that the engineers who were dedicated to working on civilian programs are being taken to work on military programs, which are much more strategic and important for them.
They decided that they wanted to focus on military programs.
That's also why there are delays with COMAC, generally speaking.
But I think, yes, they will try, and one day or another, they'll end up succeeding. Well, after that, for CFM, Pratt, and Rolls, you have to be better. You have to stay one step ahead. The Chinese will eventually be able to make engines, that's certain.
An optimistic future in about 2 decades. Either way, you stay positive about Safran.
Yeah, because actually these are businesses, they're almost monopolistic businesses. It's very, very risky. We can see that with Pratt. In other words, you could take a major industrial or technical risk. And actually, it's very, very complicated. Airlines want an engine that works, that's as cheap as possible. It's what costs airlines the most. So there you go. The competition is very, very tough, and there isn't room for everyone. So when we've shown that we're a very, very good supplier, we're in a position where actually what would threaten them is if suddenly they start making mistakes. That's the end.
Well, but let's clarify that Safran, and incidentally, are positioned as suppliers, as subcontractors, including in the defense sector with the A2SN that we often talk about, some of the best navigation systems in the world. They are in both world championships in optics with infrared cameras that are super efficient. They have their drone, the patroller, so they also have a whole range of military products, which means there is a second pillar, maybe a rebalancing with the civil sector, which is too significant and which could, in the long run, represent something more substantial.
So the military side, actually, it's the same as for Airbus. Actually, it's all these aerospace defense companies. Most of them had a big civil aerospace branch because that's the main part of the market, and a kind of byproduct, which is the defense part. And still, by nature, when you're very good in the civil sector, so I'm thinking of Airbus, I'm thinking of Safran, it's still very big and very profitable, and it remains the core of the company, but the military parts are going to increase. But these are volumes that, well, if we go back to Airbus, If we talk about the A400M today, we're at around 200 A400M aircraft, well, produced plus on order. These volumes are unrelated to the civil sector. The civil sector remains and will continue to be the main focus for these two companies.
You're still long on Safran.
Well, yes, of course.
He keeps them in his portfolio.
We can tactically, we can go in and out, it's possible, but yeah, in the long term, there's no problem. Yeah, it's a very good company.
Nicholas, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Xavier Titleman.
We hope you enjoyed it. We'll put all the links in the comments of this video so you can check out all the work and all the links to Clarton, etc. That way you can see for yourself if you're also interested in investing. This video isn't sponsored. I wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you, Xavier Titleman. Goodbye.